Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about something that, honestly, a lot of us grew up avoiding talking about sexuality at home. I know just saying that out loud might make some people shift in their seats, but stick with me here, because the truth is, these conversations are one of the strongest tools we have to keep our kids safe, informed, and confident in themselves. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. If you're watching from your local city, wherever you are, and it's morning, good morning. If it's evening, good evening. Now let's listen to the compelling story in this video of mine. I'll be honest, when I was growing up, sexuality was something whispered about behind closed doors. The adults in my life either avoided the subject entirely or made it sound like something dangerous and shameful. So when I became a parent, I had a choice to make. Was I going to repeat that pattern, or was I going to break it? The more I learned, the more I realized that avoiding these talks doesn't protect our kids. It leaves them vulnerable. When kids don't hear about sexuality from us, they hear about it from friends, the internet, or media, often full of myths, stereotypes, and sometimes outright harmful ideas. And here's the kicker: kids actually want their parents' input. Research shows that when parents talk openly about sexuality, kids are more likely to delay risky behaviors, set boundaries, and come to us when something's wrong. I remember one evening, my daughter came home from school and casually mentioned that a boy in her class had shown her a meme on his phone. Without going into detail, it was sexual and confusing to her. If I had been the let's not talk about this type of parent, I might have just told her to ignore it and move on. But instead, I took a deep breath and asked her how it made her feel. She said it was weird and gross, but also kind of funny because everyone else was laughing. That right there, that mix of curiosity and discomfort, is exactly why we need to be the ones guiding the conversation. Talking about sexuality at home isn't about handing our kids a biology lecture or telling them exactly what to think. It's about giving them accurate information, teaching them about respect, consent, and boundaries, and making sure they know we're a safe place to come with questions. Think about it. If they can ask us, they're less likely to go searching for answers in places that could mislead them. I also want to be clear. This isn't about being too open or giving kids information they're not ready for. It's about meeting them where they are developmentally. With younger kids, that might mean using simple language about body parts and privacy. With teens, it's more about relationships, respect, and responsibility. But in every case, the foundation is trust. One thing I've learned is that safety and trust aren't built in one big talk. They're built over dozens of little conversations. You might be in the car, cooking dinner, or walking the dog when a question pops up. And if you respond without judgment, without making them feel embarrassed, they'll keep coming back to you. The hard truth is, the world isn't always kind. Kids will encounter pressure, misinformation, and even predatory behavior. If we don't talk about sexuality, we leave them to navigate those waters alone. But when we do talk, really talk, we give them a compass. I used to think talking about sexuality meant I had to have all the answers. Now I know it's okay to say, "That's a good question. I'm not sure, but let's find out together." That kind of honesty doesn't make you look clueless. It makes you human. And it shows your kids that learning about sexuality is a lifelong process. So why does talking about sexuality matter? Because silence leaves space for fear, shame, and dangerous misinformation. Conversation, on the other hand, builds safety, trust, and resilience. It tells our kids, "I'm here, I care. You can talk to me about anything." And that, my friends, is one of the most powerful gifts we can give them. Breaking the awkward silence. That's the part that scares most parents. I get it. The very thought of saying words like sex, body, or consent out loud to your own child can feel unnatural. We didn't grow up with role models who made this easy. In my own house growing up, we could talk about grades, chores, or sports, but bring up anything remotely related to sexuality, and you'd see my parents' faces freeze like deer in headlights. When I became a parent, I realized I had inherited that same freeze. I wanted to say the right thing, but the idea of getting it wrong made me overthink every sentence. So here's the first trick I learned. You don't have to be perfectly polished. You just have to be present. The initial discomfort is usually because we think of the talk as this one big, high stakes event. Picture it. You're sitting across from your kid, sweating, they're staring at the floor, and you're trying to cram a lifetime's worth of information into 20 minutes. That's not how real communication works. Kids shut down when they feel lectured. They open up when they feel like they're part of an ongoing conversation. I remember when my son was about 10, we were driving home from soccer practice, and out of nowhere he asked, "Dad, what's puberty?" In that split second, I had a choice. Either deflect with a joke or dive in. My brain screamed, "Not now." But I answered anyway. I kept it simple, talked about how bodies change over time, that it's normal, and everyone's timing is different. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes. The next week, he asked more questions. That's how the ice starts to melt, bit by bit. Humor helps too. Not mocking, but gentle humor that says, this is a safe space and it's okay to laugh. Once when my daughter used the wrong word for a body part, I chuckled. Not at her, but at the mix-up, and then told her the correct term. The laughter took the tension down a notch, and she remembered the right term without feeling embarrassed. Another way to break the silence is to start with something outside of them. Something in a TV show, a news story, or even a joke they've heard at school. I've said things like, "Hey, that scene we just watched. How do you think those characters handled that relationship?" Or, "That joke they told, do you get what it meant?" It's less intimidating than sitting them down and saying, "We need to talk." And here's a secret. It's okay to acknowledge the awkwardness out loud. I've said to my kids, "Okay, this might feel a little weird to talk about, but it's important, and I want us to be able to talk about anything." You'd be amazed how much tension it releases when you stop pretending it's not awkward. The silence we inherit isn't just about discomfort. It's about fear. Fear of saying too much, fear of encouraging risky behavior, fear of losing innocence. But talking about sexuality doesn't create curiosity. It meets the curiosity that's already there. And the sooner we break the silence, the sooner our kids know they can come to us instead of hiding things from us. One thing I've learned is that breaking the silence early makes the bigger talks easier later. If you've been open since they were young, you won't suddenly have to switch modes when the topics get more serious. You'll just keep having the same kind of open, judgment-free conversations you've always had. If you're still feeling stuck, here's my go-to tip. Start small and start now. Even if it's just one sentence acknowledging a topic, you've taken the first step. And every time you push through that awkward moment, you teach your kids that their questions aren't shameful, and neither are they. That's how silence turns into trust. Answering kids' questions about sexuality is where the real test comes in. You never know when it's going to happen or what kind of curveball they're going to throw at you. Sometimes it's a question you can easily handle, and sometimes it's the kind that makes you wish you could crawl under the couch and hide. But here's the thing. How you respond in those moments can shape whether your kids feel safe coming to you in the future. I'll never forget the time my daughter, who was around 8, asked me, "How does a baby get inside a mommy's tummy?" It was right in the middle of a busy Saturday morning. We were making pancakes. My instinct was to stall. "Oh, we'll talk about that later." But then I remembered, later often never comes. So I put down the spatula and gave her an age-appropriate honest answer. I didn't launch into every biological detail, but I explained enough so she had a clear and truthful picture. She nodded, satisfied, and went right back to pouring syrup. Here's the key. Kids don't always want a textbook lecture. They want clarity. They want you to respect their question, not laugh it off or brush it aside. And when they get an answer that feels honest, they're more likely to trust you with the next question. I've learned to check myself before I react. If I look shocked, embarrassed, or irritated, I risk shutting them down. That's why I try to keep my face neutral and my voice steady, even if the question makes me squirm. Sometimes I'll even say, "That's a good question, and I'm glad you asked," before I start answering. It buys me a few seconds to think and reassures them that they're not in trouble for bringing it up. And here's something important. If I don't know the answer, I admit it. I've said things like, "I'm not totally sure about that, but we can look it up together." That honesty models curiosity and shows that learning about sexuality is an ongoing process, not a one-time download of information. Another challenge is answering questions without going beyond what they're actually asking. If your 10-year-old asks, "What's sex?" and you immediately launch into a 30-minute lecture on contraception, they might tune out. Sometimes their question is smaller than you think. So I start by asking, "What do you think it means?" Or, "Where did you hear that word?" That helps me gauge what they already know and what they actually need clarified. One time, my son asked me, "What's a condom?" Now, I could have gone down the full biology and prevention route, but when I asked him where he heard it, he said it was in a joke at school. So I explained it simply. It's something people use to help prevent babies or diseases when they have sex. That was all he needed in that moment. A week later, he came back with more detailed questions, and we built on that conversation. It's also okay to set boundaries around timing. If the question comes at a chaotic moment, like in the grocery store checkout line, you can say, "That's an important question. Let's talk about it when we get home so I can explain it better." Just make sure you follow through. If you don't, they might feel you were brushing them off. One of my favorite unexpected benefits of answering honestly is that it opens the door for conversations about values, respect, and safety. For example, when my daughter asked about kissing, I didn't just talk about the physical act. I used it as a chance to talk about consent, how kissing should only happen when both people want it, and how it's important to respect each other's boundaries. The truth is, every honest answer builds a bridge. You're telling your kids, "You can bring me your curiosity, and I'll take it seriously." And that's a bridge they'll cross again when the questions get bigger, deeper, and more urgent. When I think about my own upbringing, I wish I'd had that kind of bridge. But maybe the fact that I didn't is why I'm so committed to building it now. Teaching values without fear, that's where the conversation about sexuality starts to go beyond just anatomy and definitions. This is where we get to share what matters to us, the beliefs and principles we hope will guide our kids long after they've left our homes. But here's the tricky part. It's not about controlling their every thought or choice. It's about helping them develop their own compass while letting them know where ours points. When I was a teenager, most of the values talks I got about sexuality were fear-based. They focused on everything that could go wrong: pregnancy, disease, heartbreak, and left out anything positive. The message was clear. Sexuality was dangerous and needed to be locked away until some vague, far-off moment when it was suddenly okay. The problem was, that approach didn't prepare me for healthy relationships or responsible decisions. It just made me curious in secret. When I became a parent, I promised myself I wouldn't teach from fear alone. Yes, I'd talk about risks, but I'd also talk about respect, kindness, honesty, and empathy. I wanted my kids to know that sexuality is a normal part of being human, and that the choices they make about it should reflect not just what they want in the moment, but the kind of person they want to be. One of the ways I do this is by weaving values into everyday conversation. If we're watching a movie and a character cheats on their partner, I might say, "How do you think that affected the other person? What would you do differently?" These moments aren't lectures, they're discussions. They're chances to connect what's on the screen to real-life principles like trust and respect. I also try to model the values I talk about. Kids notice how we speak to our partners, how we handle conflict, and how we talk about other people's bodies. If I want my children to believe in respect, I have to show it in my own behavior. That means not making body-shaming comments, not laughing at sexual jokes that demean others, and speaking up when I hear someone being disrespected. Of course, values conversations sometimes mean our kids will make choices we wouldn't, and that's hard. But I remind myself, my role isn't to make every decision for them. It's to give them the tools to make good decisions on their own. That's why I don't just say, "Don't do this." I explain why I feel the way I do, and I encourage them to think critically about their own beliefs. For example, when my son asked me what I thought about dating in high school, I told him my personal view, that relationships can be meaningful, but they can also be complicated when you're still figuring out who you are. I didn't forbid it outright. Instead, I asked him what he thought he'd want in a relationship and how he'd handle challenges like jealousy or pressure. That way, it wasn't about me imposing rules, it was about us exploring the topic together. The fear-based method assumes kids will only behave if they're scared of the consequences. But fear fades, values stick. If my kids understand why respect and consent matter, not just because mom or dad said so, but because they've thought about it themselves, they're more likely to live by those principles even when I'm not around. And here's the thing. Teaching values about sexuality also means giving them space to ask about values that differ from ours. They might hear from friends or media something completely opposite to what we've taught. That's not a threat, it's an opportunity. It's a chance to say, okay, that's interesting. Let's talk about why some people believe that and why we believe differently. Ultimately, values aren't meant to trap our kids in fear. They're meant to anchor them in self-respect and empathy. And when those values are rooted in trust instead of intimidation, our kids won't just avoid danger, they'll seek out healthy, respectful, and fulfilling connections. One of the most important benefits of openly talking about sexuality at home is that it helps us spot red flags early, often before they become full-blown problems. And I'm not just talking about the obvious dangers, like predatory behavior. I'm talking about the subtle signs that something isn't right, whether it's unhealthy relationships, online exploitation, or even just a slow erosion of a child's sense of self-worth. When we don't talk about sexuality, kids learn to keep certain experiences and feelings to themselves. That means if something troubling happens, we may not hear about it until it's too late. But when we've built that open, non-judgmental communication, our kids are far more likely to bring us their concerns early, when we can still do something about them. I remember a time when my daughter was in middle school. She came home quiet one afternoon, which was unusual for her. After some gentle prompting, she admitted that a boy in her class had been making comments about her body. They weren't explicit in the sense that an adult might recognize, but they made her feel uncomfortable. Because we'd already had so many talks about respect, consent, and boundaries, she didn't question whether she was overreacting. She knew her feelings were valid and that she could tell me. That gave me the chance to step in, talk to the school, and support her before things escalated. That's the real power of early conversations. They train our kids to trust their instincts. When a situation doesn't feel right, I want my children to recognize that gut feeling for what it is, a warning, and to feel confident in acting on it. Spotting red flags early also means paying attention to changes in behavior. If a child who's usually outgoing suddenly becomes withdrawn, or if they start hiding their phone screen every time you walk by, those can be signs something's off. But here's the catch. If your home environment is one where questions about sexuality or relationships are met with shame or anger, your child will work harder to hide those signs from you. On the flip side, when you've normalized these topics, you can address issues without turning them into battles. For example, when I noticed my son spending a lot more time online late at night, I didn't accuse him of anything. Instead, I said, "I've noticed you're up late. What's keeping you online?" That opened the door for him to admit that someone had messaged him in a way that made him uncomfortable. We were able to block and report that account together. It's not always something dramatic. Sometimes the red flag is just a small piece of misinformation that could lead to trouble later. Like the time my daughter told me she'd heard from a friend that you can't get pregnant the first time you have sex. Because she felt comfortable sharing that with me, I was able to gently correct her and explain why that wasn't true. Misinformation is a red flag too, especially if it's spreading through peer groups or online. And let's not forget the red flags that might point inward, like a child feeling pressure to act in ways they're not ready for. I've told my kids over and over, if someone tries to rush you, guilt you, or make you feel uncool for setting boundaries, that's not a healthy relationship. The earlier they can recognize those patterns, the less likely they are to get pulled into them. The truth is, we can't protect our kids from every risk out there, but we can teach them how to spot danger, set boundaries, and reach out for help without shame. And we can only do that if we're willing to talk about the good, the bad, and the uncomfortable parts of sexuality. Because in the end, spotting red flags isn't just about preventing harm, it's about building a radar in our kids' minds that stays with them for life. There's one thing I've learned about talking to kids about sexuality, it's that this can't be a one and done conversation. Keeping the conversation going is the only way to make sure our kids feel supported. Not just today, but for years to come. When I was younger, my parents had one awkward birds and bees talk with me and then never brought it up again. The message I got was, "We've covered it. Now don't bring it up unless it's an emergency." But life doesn't work like that. Relationships change, our bodies change, and the challenges we face as we grow change too. If we only talk once, we're leaving our kids without guidance for all those changes. The easiest way I've found to keep the conversation alive is to treat it like any other ongoing topic, like schoolwork or future goals. We don't wait until our kids are about to graduate to talk about careers. We check in regularly. Sexuality works the same way. Every few weeks, I might bring up a news story, a TV plotline, or a passing comment from a friend as a way to invite conversation. Sometimes it's just a sentence. What did you think about how that character handled that relationship? Other times, it turns into a deep talk. One of the best parts of keeping it ongoing is that it takes the pressure off. If you miss a chance to say something today, you know there will be another opportunity soon. And because your kids know the topic isn't taboo, they're more likely to bring things to you spontaneously. I also make sure the conversation grows with them. When my kids were little, we focused on basics, correct names for body parts, privacy, and safe touch. As they got older, we added topics like consent, online safety, contraception, healthy relationships, and even emotional readiness. I try to match the conversation to their maturity, but I'm always ready to answer the harder questions when they come earlier than I expect. And here's something crucial. These talks shouldn't only happen when something bad happens. If the only time you discuss sexuality is in response to a problem, kids will start to associate the topic with trouble or shame. That's why I make sure to talk about the positive side too. Things like trust, mutual respect, and what makes a relationship healthy and enjoyable. Consistency is also about our reactions. If my child asks me something risky or shares a story that worries me, I might feel alarmed inside, but I try to keep my tone calm. Overreacting shuts down trust. Even if we need to have a serious talk or set boundaries afterward, I want their first experience to be, I can tell mom or dad anything without being yelled at. And yes, sometimes the conversation is one sentence, and sometimes it's an hour. I've learned not to measure success by length, but by connection. If we leave the exchange feeling heard and understood, that's a win. I know that when my kids are adults, they'll face choices I won't be there to witness. But my hope is that by keeping the conversation going now, they'll carry my voice, the one that taught them to value themselves, respect others, and trust their instincts into every decision they make. In the end, this isn't about having the talk. It's about having a lifetime of talks. Summary in 300 words. So, what have we learned here? Talking about sexuality at home isn't just about answering awkward questions. It's about building a relationship with our kids where safety and trust come first. It starts with understanding why these conversations matter and breaking the silence that so many of us grew up with. From there, it's about answering questions honestly, teaching our values without relying on fear, and using our openness to spot red flags early. Most importantly, it's about keeping the conversation going, letting it evolve with our children as they grow. One talk won't prepare them for a lifetime of choices, but an ongoing, supportive dialogue will. When our kids know we're a safe, non-judgmental place to go, they're more likely to share their experiences, ask for advice, and make decisions that reflect both knowledge and respect. I know these talks aren't always easy. There will be moments of discomfort, and sometimes we'll wish we'd said something differently. But perfection isn't the goal. Connection is. Every honest, respectful conversation we have adds another layer of trust, and that trust is the foundation for everything else. So the truth is this. Talking about sexuality at home doesn't take away our kids' innocence. It gives them the tools to protect it, to understand themselves, and to form healthy, respectful relationships for the rest of their lives. Thanks for sticking with me through this story. Enjoy listening and subscribe to the channel to see the next video.